when Mara Ellison's husband, Julian, announced during a crowded Sunday brunch that he was tired of carrying a wife who had stopped moving forward. She didn't recognize the man sitting across the table from her, especially because he had spent the previous 3 years telling everyone that her quiet life, freelance work, and preference for staying out of the spotlight were exactly what he loved about her. The restaurant was filled with silverware and weekend conversations, but his words seemed to silence the entire room around her as he added, "I want a woman people notice when she walks into a room." And instead of crying or asking what she could change, Mara simply folded her napkin, placed it beside her untouched coffee, and said, "Then you should probably stop waiting for me to become someone else." Before that morning, Mara had spent 7 years believing their relationship was the safest place in her life, beginning with the night she met Julian at a community fundraiser in Portland, where she was volunteering to decorate a children's reading corner, and he was helping organize donations for his investment company. He had been funny without trying, curious about her work restoring old houses, and fascinated by the fact that she could look at a cracked wall and imagine what it could become. So their relationship grew through rainy weekend drives, cheap takeout, ambitious renovation projects, and eventually a small wedding at a vineyard outside Salem, where they promised each other they would never become strangers simply because life became busy. The first warning signs arrived so gradually that Mara mistook them for ordinary adulthood, because Julian began traveling more for work, buying expensive clothes he suddenly cared about, answering messages during dinner, and referring to a new colleague named Celeste whenever he described the exciting parts of his week, while Mara was building her restoration business from a tiny room at home and quietly handling nearly everything else in their shared life. Whenever she asked whether something was wrong, Julian would smile, kiss her forehead, and say, "You're imagining things." But his affection became increasingly mechanical. His weekends became filled with mysterious appointments, and the man who once wanted to spend entire Saturdays exploring flea markets with her suddenly seemed embarrassed by the very hobbies that had brought them together. Mara tried to repair what she thought was merely distance, not betrayal, by organizing surprise dinners, booking a weekend at the Coastal Hotel where they had celebrated their 2nd anniversary, buying tickets to his favorite baseball team, and even accepting invitations to corporate gatherings where she knew nobody. But each attempt seemed to make him more critical rather than more loving. Then came the night that finally broke the illusion when Julian returned home nearly 4 hours late, tossed his keys onto the counter, looked at the restoration plans covering their kitchen table, and said, "You keep talking about dreams like they're accomplishments," before casually informing her that he was considering moving out because he had outgrown the life they built. Of arguing, Myra walked into her office, closed the door, and opened a notebook she had not touched since college, writing one question across the first page. What would my life look like if I stopped trying to earn his approval? The question frightened her because she realized how long she had been measuring every decision against Julian's reactions, and that same night she called her older sister Nina, who listened without interrupting before saying, "Don't make a decision because you're angry, Mara. Make one because you're finally clear." Advice that changed the way Mara approached everything that followed. The next morning, Mara contacted a family attorney recommended by Nina and began quietly separating facts from emotions, discovering that several unexplained business expenses were connected to weekends Julian had claimed were mandatory conferences, while hotel reservations, restaurant charges, and messages on a shared tablet revealed that Celeste was far more than a colleague. The discovery hurt, but it also gave Mara something she had been missing for months: certainty. And when her attorney explained that the house had been purchased entirely with Mara's savings and a documented inheritance before the marriage, she realized she did not have to fight for a future from scratch because she had already built the foundation herself. Julian's confidence disappeared when he learned that Mara had filed for separation, and he arrived home expecting the frightened woman who had once begged him to talk things through, only to find her sitting calmly at the dining table with organized documents in front of her. "You really did all this without telling me?" he asked, and Mara looked at him for several seconds before answering. You spent months making decisions without telling me, Julian. I simply stopped waiting for an invitation to protect my own life." While his attempts to blame her, criticize her choices, and insist that Celeste didn't mean anything became increasingly meaningless once the evidence was presented through their attorneys. The months that followed were difficult rather than glamorous, because freedom did not instantly erase years of hurt, and Mara had mornings when she stared at her reflection, wondering whether Julian's cruel comments had revealed something true about her. But every time that doubt appeared, she returned to the work she had abandoned emotionally while trying to save the marriage. She redesigned her office, accepted a historic home restoration project she had previously considered too ambitious, began attending local architecture meetings, reconnected with friends she had slowly stopped seeing, and discovered that the part of herself she thought had disappeared had actually been waiting patiently beneath years of compromise. By the time the separation became final, Mara's restoration project had won a regional design award. Her business had gained several new clients, and she had moved into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar at first, but eventually became peaceful. While Julian's relationship with Celeste ended after the reality of his new life proved far less exciting than the fantasy he had been chasing. One evening, nearly a year after that painful brunch, Mara stood on the porch of the restored Victorian house she had transformed for a client, watched the sunset turn the windows gold, and finally understood that the greatest revenge had never been making Julian regret losing her. It had been becoming so comfortable with herself that his regret no longer mattered. Mara never claimed the marriage had been entirely terrible, because there had been real laughter, meaningful memories, and years she would always value. But she finally understood that loving someone did not require disappearing inside their expectations, and leaving did not mean she had failed, because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stop negotiating with someone who has already chosen to stop showing up. She closed her notebook that night, smiled at the woman reflected in the window, and whispered, "I didn't lose my life when he left. I finally got the chance to live it." Then stepped back inside, locked the door behind her, and began planning the next project without asking anyone whether her dream was impressive enough. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.